All right, so this video is part 2 and follow-up to the previous video I did titled What is Qi? If you haven't watched that yet, I highly recommend it because I'm sort of picking up where that video left off, where I covered this amount of detail over here, or this amount of information in a bit more detail, which I'm just going to kind of glance over and move on in this video. Because it's always, for me at least, it's a question of, okay, well, what can you do with that? What is the actual functional, practical application within a process that is actually real and tangible? Because people can have lots of different definitions or usages for things, whether it's in this context qi. But for example, we could look at the classical characters and say, oh, well, it's like rice and grain down here cooking and steam and something coming off. It's like, okay, well, that's not this definition really. But then the question becomes, okay, well, what can you do with it? And how does that definition actually relate to something tangible and real? And is that definition and that conceptual understanding informing and empowering, or is it just sort of just abstractly hanging out there, not really doing anything? Which is also, I mean, this is the modern mindset. People really just like things like that for the sake. I mean, a lot of theoretical physics and a lot of things that people like win awards for. It's like, well, what can you do with that? Oh, nothing. Oh, well, have you tested it and produced any actual benefit for anyone as a result of this work? Oh, no. But we're closer to theoretically, potentially, maybe, possibly sometime in the future, maybe understanding something. But then when we get to that understanding, we realize, oh wait, we still don't understand anything more. We just know that we don't know again. Oh, it's like, okay, and this is, you're dedicating your life to this? It's like, I don't know. To me personally, it just seems like a bit of a waste of time, a bit masturbatory, and it's not really producing anything tangible. Whereas we're talking about Qigong and Neigong, we want it to be tangible. We want to produce an actual result, not just like kind of, sort of, maybe, possibly, sometime. Because then it's reflective of how we're actually choosing to live our life. Which, why am I like railing on people's personal choices or psychological ways of showing up in the world? Because that's what the art that I'm talking about is looking at. So getting into the sense of Qi is not something intangible. At a very fairly beginner stage, it becomes very clear what things are doing and what's happening. But really, Qigong and Neigong in particular is looking at how the mind is shaping the tissues and the quality of the mind, and then how that is affecting the body. And that's not too far away from medicinal theory, because it's kind of understood like, oh, well, this certain organ has a certain spectrum of influence on the way our mind functions, and then let's say that organ is imbalanced in a certain direction, it's going to cause fairly predictable things in the tissues. So let's say you're really angry, you're really bitter, frustrated. Okay, well, that's affecting the liver, gallbladder, the wood element. So that's going to condition your movements in a certain way because it's affecting the tendons and ligaments. It's going to condition your abdomen in a certain way because it's affecting these organs. It's going to affect your digestion, could affect your blood pressure, could affect your sex drive, could affect a lot of things, but it's just fairly predictable based on a certain quality of the mind. But people get that mixed up because they're like, oh, well, that must mean that being angry is bad. No, it's more so looking at what's our predominant reflective patterning, and then how does that shape the tissues. It's not necessarily good or bad, right or wrong. It's sort of just like, well, what's a bit more functional and effective? So how that relates to actual practice and application is starting from the very beginning. It's like standing. Okay, what's the point of that? Well, we're trying to like reshape and restructure the body, and basically we're trying to do that because the mind, from the standpoint of this system of practice, everyone's mind is distorted. The way we see the world is distorted. thus the way our bodies function is also distorted. Because at a deeper level, we've all been conditioned through our upbringing, and depending on our experience, we all have kind of a default standpoint that we go to, which has a certain elemental quality. Making it simple, there's the 5 emotions that relate to the 5 elements. So each one of us will relate to one of these things and default back to that. Could be anger, frustration, injustice, resentment. It could be sadness. It could be fear. It could be overexcitation, or it could be sort of a combination. This is generally the case. And it's not so much about the surface level manifestations, but what is the underlying quality? It's actually getting to a qualitative awareness rather than a quantitative awareness, which is a whole other big subject and topic. So basically, what we're trying to do is build more of a neutral shape, which in the beginning, it becomes very gross, like, put your muscles here, do this here, do the joints and line up the skeletons. But then eventually that stuff starts to relax, because in the beginning it's all bound and it's all locked up and our structure's all distorted and weird. So we're trying to get that more to a neutral thing so that the muscles and the tissues can relax and let go. That takes away a lot of the tension, surface level binding. And then eventually the shaping of the tissues happens with purely the mind, based on the ability of the mind to conduct through the body. But in the beginning, everyone's mind is basically like here and maybe like fingertips and feet, but it's not able to completely go through the entire body. It's like if you looked at the body as if it was an empty container and the mind is a fluid, so the mind completely is able to fill that entire container. But that's not how we really function. So in the beginning, this is really a lot of what the practice is trying to do, and some of the basic reasons for why it's trying to do that. And also it's trying to put qualities of release, qualities of enjoyment, casual observation, and a few other qualities it's trying to practice and put into the mind, and then to create certain effects and chains of causality in the body. So that is part of it. And then the first big major aim, the major flow that we would look at is the downward flow, meaning the ability for the mind to sink, drop, go down, and get basically the weight of gravity off of our body, which is what I was saying, is eventually we stand and it's like, muscles really hurt, like this sucks, it's really uncomfortable. But then eventually those just go, and then it's like, okay, I could stand for a while and it's not that difficult because gravity is affecting our body, but our body's not really resisting it, so it doesn't get stuck, doesn't get caught. Because also one of the major basic tenets of Chinese medicine is where there's movement and free flow, there's health. Where there's blocking and stagnation, there's disease. So through standing, we actually start to become aware of where things are blocked, where things are stuck, because that's where literally things are bound up. But things are generally bound up because of the mind being bound up, and not necessarily always literally like, oh, well, you're mad at your 3rd grade teacher because they were mean to you and you just need to pray for them and forgive them and that will heal your shoulder. That's not really how this system is really functioning, because that's still a generally surface level type of manifestation. It's more so looking at the underlying quality, because you can forgive everyone and still be a fucking asshole. I mean, you could forgive everyone and be the kindest, sweetest person on the planet, but ultimately the quality of your mind is still contracted and not very functional. So it's not to say that forgiving people is important or not important. That's a personal decision. But also the point is reshaping and changing the quality of the mind, which will then create literal, tangible changes in the body. So it's basically, I've had this conversation with people before, they're talking about, oh, meditation, I had all these breakthroughs and I processed all this stuff. And it's like, well, I mean, the way you're orienting your body in reality is pretty much the exact same. So how tangible and how potent was that thing you worked so hard for? I don't know, just questions to ask. So anyways, getting back to more how this can be tangible is, for example, when the downward flow actually starts to happen, there are clear things, clear systems, like this will happen, then this will happen, and this will happen, and this will happen, and this will happen. Not always in a linear fashion. Sometimes it's skipping around, but it's generally predictably understood. These things will be a result if this specific process is happening. Okay? So the downward flow is basically, it helps to create and give the body space for anything it doesn't need. Any excess, anything it's hanging on to, kind of let go and eliminate. Okay? So eventually what starts to happen when the mind is able to conduct through the body in the correct way and have the correct qualities in place, the first thing that generally starts to happen is blood flow really increases. Warmth really increases, because, I mean, it's a common Chinese medicine thing that qi and blood are pretty intertwined. So when the qi actually starts to sink, your mind actually starts to be able to move through the body through a lot of specific processes, which I've kind of touched on and danced around. Then what tends to happen? Even blood flow. Not like, oh, my hands are ice cubes, but my back is warm, or like my left shoulder is really hot, but the rest of me is totally cold. No, head to toe, evenly warm, evenly blood circulating and moving, because the tenet of Chinese medicine, where there's movement and free flow, health. Well, there's blockage and stagnation, meaning I'm warm here and warm here and warm here, but the rest is all ice cold. That's not really movement and free flow, so perhaps it could be a lack of ease. And then another thing that generally starts to happen is the fascia and the tissues start to unwind and unbind off of the grabbing and the holding. So the skin becomes very like slidey, and you can grab it and move it around over top of the tissues. That's one aspect. The other thing is just things lengthen. So it's like more space is created inside the body. And then another side is the actual joints get more space. Not huge amounts, but it has this sensation of inside the joint actually goes like and expands a little bit, and that really lengthens and relaxes and elongates the body. Very clear, very tangible, very black and white. Not imaginary, not a cerebral abstract definition, not superstition. Just basically the result of following specific chains of causality, putting in the amount of time and practice, having the correct theory, having the correct application, and then working with those things. Because again, this is just the very beginner basics. There's much more afterwards. There's much more that happens along the way. But I just wanted to give some clear, tangible things. And it's not vague. So it's sort of just really a pet peeve of mine that so much of the way this stuff is approached is so vague. Whether that's from medicinal practitioners, internal martial arts, or meditation, or Qigong or Neigong. It's just pretty much a question of, okay, well, what definition are you using? How does that relate to the actual chains of causality that you're working with? And is that actually creating results? So yeah, I think that's pretty much the gist. Hopefully that's been somewhat helpful. I don't know. But I'll talk to you soon.